G'day, my name's Gordon Dedman and welcome to another episode of Bushcraft Survival. I've been camping out in the bush for the last couple of days, and what I thought I'd do today is show you how to make a one-man debris hut using leaves and the materials and the resources in this area. So let's get on with it. There may come a time when you're out in the bush and you don't have any resources and you need to make a shelter to keep yourself dry, out of the rain and warm. So we're going to have a look at a shelter that does just that, that's easy to build and doesn't take a lot of skill and it doesn't need any equipment. Now this shelter I actually learnt from on one of Paul Kirtley's courses in the UK and one of Ray Mears's courses, so it's nothing new, and these shelters work very, very well in a deciduous environment of the north. But we had a bushfire through here last year and this whole area, the understory was burnt, and so it's all been cleared, which is great, and there's a plethora of leaves around that have fallen from the trees, so it's just like a deciduous environment at the moment. So we're going to take advantage of that, and I'm going to show you one of the shelters that they build in the north, because it's a very, very good shelter and it's actually quite simple to build as well. So a couple of key things before we on siting our shelter, and we always need to think carefully and correctly about where you site the shelter. So number one is we look down, we look all around and we look up, because what we don't want to be doing is siting a shelter on a game trail where animals, a thoroughfare for animals. We don't want it at the bottom of a hill, because if we're down, we're actually on a slight hill here, and there's a creek line down here where I've got where I've been sourcing my water from, and cold air sinks, so cold air moves down the hill, and it is autumn at the moment, it's getting down to about 11 degrees at night, so it's in the middle of the night, it's probably lower than that. So we don't want to put our shelter right at the bottom. So locally, the localized low area is over there about 30 meters. So I've chosen this area because it's not quite as low, it's not up high, so that cold air is going to move past us. I've also looked for a nice clear area where there's lots of resources. We've got lots of leaves and there's lots of things I can build this shelter with. The other thing is I've looked up and all around. There's no deadfall above me, any nasty thing. There's a lot of good, nice, healthy trees. The trees here are very tall and straight and they grow up just trying to get fighting for competition to get that sunlight. So they're growing really, really, really strong. So there's a few branches coming off this one here, but they're nice and green and there's nothing to worry about. So you need to really think about those things first. And because there's so many leaves, I don't have to walk a long way to get them as well. So with that said, let's get on with it. Here's a good score. In the process of collecting all our framework, I've come across there's a few pieces like this of stringy bark, and this dead decaying bark makes great tinder. That's a little bit wet and punky, but as I strip this off, anything like that, you always resource that makes great tinder, so I can collect that as well, stick it in my pockets, so I've got a fire for later on as well. So that's really important to resource and collect things as you go. Keep your eye open, whether it's for food sources or anything like that. Collecting timber, as you can see, and that's not even half of what I need for the shelter, but it hasn't taken me too long to get that. It's not probably 15 minutes, if that. So that's not too bad. But you need a lot. Always work on the 80-20 rule. Whatever you think, if you want to go for 80%, give it that extra 20% more is what you're after all the time. So yeah, so always keep your eyes open. There's tinder, all things to be found. That's just knowing what to look for, and that strips off beautifully. So there's another really good bit over there which I'm going to do, and that'll come in handy for my fire tonight. Rightio. Well, we've got our frame built. It's a tripod, and I've searched out some pieces that had a fork. I had to use my saw a couple of times to try and find, because the ones that are on the ground are actually too dead in this area. And I've lashed them together with a vine. You don't have to do that, but I've just chosen for extra support. But this is just a simple tripod, and we're just going to go around with the these dead pieces of wood we've got and just put them, they're going to be the framework for us to put our leaves on. But that's good and solid. It only needs to be as big as I can sit up and curl in the fetal position. In a cold environment, the bigger your shelter, the more warmth you need. The idea of a debris shelter is that your body heat warms it up, so you can use it without a fire. That's the whole point. So, however, this comes into its own when you put a fire in front of it. But the bigger you have it, the more heat it's going to take to warm that up. So that's why you want to keep it small. You don't have to be able to spread out. So we're aiming for a colder climate. That's what we always aim to build them for the, say, worst case scenario. So we're going to go ahead now and just put all the sides up, and then we'll put our leaves on. One thing I need to mention is that when you're collecting these sticks, you need to make sure they're as straight as possible, because if they've got any sort of bend, they'll tend to hang and do this, and it'll actually impact the inside of a shelter and make it smaller. And they just sit better when they're straight. So aim to use any straight as possible. And any that are bent, just literally break off the bent bit and use a straight bit. It just makes it a lot easier to set the shelter. And you can change angles. You'll find you'll need to do that to hold different ones up, because they'll just fall down otherwise. So you have to spray them out, and you use the bottom ones to hold these ones up. But you'll work that out. Once you get going, it's actually quite fast. Now the other thing is we don't want to have them too long, because if they poke out the top with the leaves, water will catch on that and then drain down. So you don't want them too much longer than the actual ridge pole. That's the idea. Okay, that's the framework pretty much finished. What I'm going to go and do now is just have a look for any holes and just fill it up with any light sticks. It doesn't matter if they've got hooks on them now, because that's actually going to aid in catching the leaves. So I'm just going to go around and fill up any holes. Okay, we've finished the framework, and we've got a bit of weather coming over. The clouds are coming over, so it's gotten dark all of a sudden. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to go and make myself a rake. Just going to get a branch, a forked branch. I'm going to rake up as many of these leaves as I can. Then I'm going to put them around the shelter, observing correct watershed, which means what I'm going to do is stack them all around bottom up. Always build up the bottom up. They're going to naturally fall down to the bottom anyway, so what we're aiming for is a good 3 feet of thickness if we can, at least 2 feet. And we're going to go all around the shelter from the bottom up and doing as much as we can, so we'll get stuck into it. So it's just a matter of raking leaves up and sticking them on. It's so important to be able to have a tool that makes things a lot easier and a lot quicker. I actually used my saw because I needed a green bit of wood for this because it's stronger. Because of the bushfire, most of the trees around here are dead and they just snap off. So you need something green for this, so it's got the rigidity, and you're looking for something that's got a lot of branches coming up. The leaves just before the leaves just go through the middle, so you need something with at least 3. So something like that is ideal, and this makes things a lot easier, a lot quicker, and it really halves the time. So I'm going to press on and do that, going all the way around as I've done each layer. Then I just build it all up. I'm aiming for about at least 2 foot deep. Whew, that's hot work. Okay, it's taken me about an hour to complete that. However, you have to double everything for filming. So whatever time it takes you would normally make, you've got to double everything because filming takes ages, setting up the camera and changing batteries and all that sort of thing. So it adds time to it. But generally speaking, roughly about an hour and a half. The greatest time is spent collecting the resources and, you know, preparing everything, getting all that ready. The leaves are actually the quickest part of it, but it's still hot work, and I'm being careful not to sweat, because in a cold environment that would be very dangerous, because if you sweat, once it cools down, you can't get dry, you're in trouble if you can't make a fire. And of course sweat, particularly with cottons and the wrong sorts of clothing, in a cold environment, your cottons get wet because of sweat and you can't dry them out, and you lose heat through conduction to those wet clothes. So it's very important to, I'm being conscious, that's why I've taken off layers so I don't sweat too much, because it's starting to cool down now, even though I'm really hot, and then I'll just add layers as I start to cool down, but the last thing I want to do is sweat. So I'm still not done yet. I'm going to go around and do another 20% yet, just to make sure, because that's the stage when you get lazy, and it's that extra bit that counts. Just like firewood, however much firewood you think you need, you can triple it. In a cold climate, quadruple it. But in this instance, what I need is a lot more, because if it's going to rain, I need at least 3 foot to account for that watershed and some seepage through. The thicker it is, the less chance that'll happen. The thicker it is, it also adds as a better insulation, and actually be amazed at how insulated this is. With a very cool breeze coming down this hill, the air's not going to actually come straight into my shelter either, which is another thing. So it's actually going to keep me, it's just going to go right past me down into the creek bed. So this is going to be a really nice place. So I'm just going to go and crack on and do an extra 20% at the top and just make sure we've got that thick coverage. We can actually go inside. If I see any light patches, which I doubt, then you just put extra attention onto those areas. We've finally finished the shelter. Took a little bit longer than I thought with battery changes and things like that. I had to charge up a battery, so that takes time. And of course, we get the sun. Well, the sun's not quite down. It's actually, the forest is actually quite very high here, so it actually it gives the impression the sun's gone down early, so it gets a little bit darker in here than what it is up on the ridges. But the shelter's done. It's actually come out pretty well. I'm looking forward to spending a night in here. And this shelter really comes into its own when you have a fire in front of it, because we're nice and insulated from the back, and this gives us our nice warm air coming in. So I'm going to finish off by lighting the fire. I'm going to light it with hand drill, and we'll get that going. as always, small sticks, lots and lots of dead small sticks. Don't just stick it on, give it a little bit of oxygen until that takes, and once the flames come through the top, then it's okay to put on your next layer of kindling or fuel. And if your preparation's correct, it shouldn't take any longer than that. So this is where this shelter really comes into its own. I can feel the radiating heat of that fire, and I'm nice and insulated in here. The only thing I need to do to improve this shelter is to put down a platform, because this cold environment, this would be cold. So I'd want to get myself 2 foot off the ground. We might have a look at making a bough bed or making a leaf bed in another episode. But to get me out of the rain or out of the conditions with a fire, I've done that. I could go and cut down a lot of boughs very quickly and get some leaves. It doesn't take very much time. I could easily do that, but as I said, we're losing light. So, and I would do that. If I was to sleep in here tonight, that's exactly what I would do, and I'd build this up about this high. Now, people might ask, we've got a fire and we've got a leaf shelter here. Is that a risk? No, it's not. If anyone knows anything about fire, little sparks, the only way you'd catch this alight is as a big ember. I'd have to take an ember off the fire and throw it in that for that to do any damage. A spark will not set gum leaves alight because the gum leaves are too coarse. If you know about tinder, you see how hard it is to make friction fire. You need to have tinder that fine to be able to turn into fire. So unless the only way that could happen is if this shelter was made of tinder like I just made my fire with, so it'd be impossible. The reason why a lot of bushfires start, besides just idiots not knowing how to manage a fire and put it out correctly, is because people have fires that are way, way too large. This is too large, but that's only because it's just starting. This will die down to nothing. You don't need a fire any bigger than that. The only time you need a big fire is if you're warming yourself, say in a freezing environment. Say for example, if I only had the clothes on my back, I'd want to have a long log fire to keep me warm. I wouldn't be worried about a spark getting in there because a spark won't catch on gum leaves. They're too coarse. It takes an ember, and none of this wood spits. So if you know about the wood, you know about fire making and things like that, you'll see that a lot of those risks can be completely taken away because it comes down to knowledge, practice. But a lot of these skills aren't being practiced today, particularly with kids growing up, because they spend all their time on computer games. So they're not learning vital life skills, and a lot of adults for that matter as well. So a lot of these skills, bushcraft is about going into nature, learning a lot of these skills, learning how to build shelters, make fires, but it's more than just survival. It's a gateway into the natural environment, to indigenous skills, and you learn about nature, and by learning about it, not only are they fun and interesting skills, they help you to be able to respect nature and therefore value it. And we live and this is our home for everyone. So all these skills, it couldn't be any more relevant today, particularly to keep these skills alive, because it teaches us so much about the world that we're all a part of. Well, after we finish up this afternoon, I went a little bit longer and I got myself like a couple of small logs just across the entrance here, and behind that I did about 10 loads of leaves. So I've got a nice springy mattress. Now for cold climate you'd need a lot more than that, but that's just all I had time to do. And on top of that I've just got my ground sheet. Now you wouldn't really need to use that, and I'm just going to sleep in here tonight on that with my wool blanket. It's actually a bit cool, but it's actually quite good. I can feel that breeze as it cools down. The cool air is sinking down towards the creek line. You can see the smoke blowing away down there. It's actually blowing across the front of this shelter, which is actually ideal. sometimes a lot of people think that they need to put their shelter with the back of the shelter facing the wind. But what happens, the wind comes around the shelter and it eddies, just like a water would flowing past a rock in a stream. It will eddy, and the same thing happens with smoke, and you get smoke in your face all night. So the fact that the wind's blowing slightly across is ideal, so that's blowing that smoke away from me, but I can still feel that radiant heat. In fact, it's quite warm in here, getting some good heat. If it was really cold, I'd probably have the fire a little bit closer. Once again, there's no risk of that coming in here. You'd have to drop a big solid ember in there to get that to happen. Sparks aren't going to do anything because they're just gum leaves, and it's far too coarse to even ignite from that. But other than that, it's a really good feeling. It's very, very comfortable. I'm looking forward to a good night's sleep, and tomorrow we're going to get stuck into a whole stack of skills. So I'm going to hit the sack, and I'll see you in the morning. Well, good morning. It was a pretty chilly night last night. I'm not sure what it got down to. It was definitely very cold. But this shelter was actually brilliant. It's actually very comfortable. This bed of leaves I put down was fantastic, and we'll have a look at that today. But what I did, I had got my, I just put a ground sheet, which I always take with me as part of my kit, but of course you wouldn't actually have that if you're stuck out in the bush with nothing, and you shouldn't be stuck out with the bush with nothing if you always got your 10-piece, 12-piece kit with you, because it's the minimum amount of stuff you should have. But he said that Murphy's Law strikes all the time, so if you didn't have that, you can make something like that in the grass, and if that's all you got, leaves, and that's all you got, I'd have a lot more. I didn't put enough on because there's more time, but I'm going to build this up to about this high, and then you want all the leaves to compress down. We'll talk about that today anyway. But I had my wool blanket, and we'll also have a look at how to use a wool blanket. And that's a nice, that's like one of the old frontier methods, and the old swagmen used to use a wool blanket. And wool is king when it comes to cold, because it can get wet. It still retains 70% of its insulary value when it's wet. Excuse me, wool is excellent. And a nice big one, you can double it over. So I brought that as my bedroll. So it's really, really good. So it's quite comfortable, and I was warm enough, so that was great. Got a bit chilly, the fire went out, not sure what time, but we'll get that going again. And if it was really, really cold, I could probably have that fire without any risk a little bit closer as well. But other than that, it was a good night's sleep. So I'm going to get the fire on now, get a cup of tea on, have some breakfast, and then we're going to look at a whole stack of different tips and tricks today, and we'll get all those on camera. So look forward, so join me for the rest of the day. Okay, it's time to restart this fire. Just using what we've got. I'm just going to get a fire going, I haven't even checked to see how much warmth there. Okay, there's nothing left in there at all. Nothing. So I'm just going to put some sparks into some of this charcoal or charred bits of wood, and see if we can get an ember going that way. All I need is my knife, which in this case is a Mora carbon Garberg, and my fire steel. Yes, I could just light up the papers to park and do that as well, but here's just another trick you can do. Takes a little bit more time, and it doesn't always happen the first go, so you just have to be a bit patient. But let's see, we'll give it a shot anyway. Trying to get 2 bits of burnt wood with still some of that sort of white ashy texture to them. That looks good. Sometimes you have to experiment with different bits and pieces. That might be okay. So what I'm going to do is just put some sparks into that. Okay, we've got a nice little ember. Not sure if you can see that. I've changed my mind already. What I'm going to do now is just quickly get a tinder bundle together and just stick that in the tinder bundle because it's going to be faster. Well, we'll see. Changed my mind a lot. But sometimes you just got to roll with the punches. Sometimes things just change. We might be able to get a... Let's have a look. There you go, we're away. There you go. I need to dig this this pit out a little bit and elongate it and build it a little bit, dig it a little bit deeper. What that does, that just allows the coals to form and stay. And of course the smoke's going right into the camera. I'm going to have to move the camera. Bad preparation on my part there. Should have checked the wind. The wind is quite consistent. All these unburnt pieces I can just, whoops, reuse. And put that kettle on the fire. They'll catch a light very quickly. Any of these bits of coal, bits of charcoal I should say, you can just stick them back in there and they'll just reignite. So you don't really need to use matches and those things. Yes, you can, it's quicker, but you're not practicing any skills. The whole idea is when you're out doing bushcraft activities is to try different things. Always have them there as a standby, and in emergency, yeah, of course I'm going to use a lighter. I'm not going to waste time using the friction fire in a real emergency. You do what you need to do to get the job done as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. But the joy of this is to train with different things, because it gives you a different insight into how things, the materials and their properties and how they work, and it's fun. And that's actually the whole point of bushcraft, using what nature provides with minimal equipment. That's all. And bushcraft is about knowledge and skills, not equipment. So we want to try and minimise that equipment where possible, just to a few key items. When this is boiled, I'm going to have a cup of tea. I'm going to get some breakfast ready, and we'll have a look at our camp. Continue some refurbishments. We're actually going to show you how I did the bed here, and then we'll get crack on with some skills. Okay, so I've put some leaves in here, quite a few leaves, and I've got a front stopper or a frame, and what that's going to do is just contain all these leaves within the shelter. Now in a colder environment I would need that to be a lot thicker, and remember when you lie on it, it compresses, so you probably need about this much to compress down to this much. So in that case I would get another one of these and stick it on top. But I'm not going to do that because I don't need to do that at the moment, but I'm just going to go with the one. So in order to do that, all I need is just a couple of tent pegs, because I'm just going to pin it. I'm just going to pin it on each end, and then one in the middle. We just need 3, we don't need 4. Just one in the middle and 2 on either end, just to keep that there so it doesn't move. So I need to make some tent pegs. So in order to make tent pegs with our knife, so we only need, because it's a short tent peg in this tent, even though it's not a tent peg, we just need a short peg at the moment, because we need to hammer it down so that it's level with the wood. So when we're making a tent peg with our foregrip on our knife, and this knife is the Mora Garberg in this instance, but it doesn't matter what knife you have, it's the one you have on you, which is the one you have as long as it's sharp. And I cut to the outside of my body. Remember, all the vital organs are in here. We call it the triangle of death. So you need to stay away from that area at all costs. So cutting to the outside of the body, I'm going to put a point on this. So you can see you're going to put a good point. You could do 3-sided. It's a knot right there. And there you go. I'm just going to chamfer the end so it doesn't break. That's a bit too pointy there. And on the other end I'm going to use the chest lever grip to chamfer the top end. And now I've created a tent peg, or just a stake, with a chamfered end that is going to allow me to hammer that into the ground. If I didn't chamfer it, because a stick like this is just a bundle of fibres, it's going to split. So you need to chamfer the top so that that doesn't happen. Here's a quick tip. When you go into the bush and you're setting up your camp, one of the first things you need is something to hammer tent pegs in. Now you're not going to take a hammer into the woods with you and cart that around in your pack. That would sort of would go against all of the principles of bushcraft. Remember, bushcraft being going into the bush with minimal equipment and making use of everything around you and making your own tools. So a camp mallet is what we're going to make, and it's the most, probably one of the first tools you need to learn how to make, because you'll use it for everything. And depending on where you are, sometimes it's hard to get wood that can suit that purpose. For example, in northern Australia, up near Darwin, most of the wood is infested by termites. So trying to find something at hand on the ground is really difficult, because it just breaks when you use it. So there's only a few different types of wood you can use up there. And many times I've gone into the bush and you're looking around for something to hammer your tent peg in, wishing you had a mallet. So I'm going to show you a very quick way of just making a very simple mallet. All you need to, now we could actually use this, there's no problem, that's good enough. And for what your purpose is, that's all you need. But if we want to do something a little bit more elaborate, something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, we're now going to turn this in to a functional camp mallet. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if it has a thicker end, I want the thicker end as being my banging in end. I'll say that again, banging in end. The thinner end, because then that's going to give us a lot of weight. So I've decided that's the thicker of the two, so I want this to be my hitting end. The bark is going to come off this really quick once you start banging things. On the other end, I'm just going to draw a square, because this is going to be my handle. And what I'm doing, I'm actually going to draw the lines of where I'm going to, the lines that I'm going to use my knife to batten with. So what I'm going to do, hope you can see that, I'm just going to, with a piece of my charcoal, because there's lots of that around here at the moment, I'm just going to draw a square. I'm trying to get the center of that, I'm upside down here, get the center of that section. My pencil will hold together, and I'm going to come up with something like that. And what that's going to do, that's where I'm going to put my knife when I batten. It's also doing something else. Where I've marked those four sides, I'm now going to colour those four sides. That doesn't work too well. There's one there. I'm actually going to use my knife to do that. I'm going to look where those sides are, those are corners. Well, I should flat sides, I should. But I'm just going to mark that with my knife. You'll see why in a minute. Right, so I've marked a flat side where each of those sides of the square is. Before I actually batten down there, I'm actually now going to come down to the length I want my handle, and I'm going to make a saw cut on those four flat sides. And what that's going to give me is a stop cut, so that when I batten, my knife won't go down any further than that stop cut. So that's what we're going to do now. So on that flat side, I'm just going to make a saw cut, say round about the length of my handle, which is about there. That's where I'd like that. And I'm just going to make sure it's on one of those corners. Doesn't need to go down too far. Trying to keep that nice and square. I don't want that too far. Then I come down again. Now I go to one of the other corners. Remember, you've got to account there's a little bit of bark on here. I'll go to the other one. And the last corner. And the reason why I've done that is if you don't do that flat side, you won't know where your saw cut is when you can't see. So that's why that's from experience. Now I put my saw away. Remember, always put your tools away. Now this is the chicken before the egg. before I've made my mallet, I need another mallet to do my battening. So I've got my other one there. I'm just going to use this other round that we have. And what I do is I place my knife on one of those corners. Now when you're battening, it's very, very important that when you are battening, you put the handle right up to the end of the wood. You don't want the wood to be so thick that the blade's hidden. That's not ideal. This is a good size. So I'm going to put my handle in there on that point, and with my mallet, keeping it, notice I've got a good strong base here. As I hit, I'm going to hit that knife down on the top until it's level with the wood. Then, pushing down with my left hand, I hit the end. And that should stop when I get to my stop cut, which it did, just like that. Then I just go around and repeat that process. And there you've got your four corners done nicely. Now what I need to do is, from that position there, I'm going to I could batten, or I can just use my knife hand. Oh, sorry, I can just use my hand. I don't need to actually use a batten. Sort of like feather sticks. I could stick the knife on the corner there and batten that off, batten those corners off. It's whatever you want to do, really. Just down to there. Do the same on that one. It's probably just as easy to do that. Battening is just simply turning your knife into a small axe. The key is to make sure that you're not trying to batten wood that's too thick for the capabilities of the knife. You need a full tang knife for this. The Mora HD heavy duty companions are also great for this. And it's not full tang, but they're brilliant. And they generally don't break. The reason they break is because of improper technique. So I'm putting a lot forward cut, just a lot of power into there, and you can see that saw cut has now acted as a stop cut. Now I can flip that off if you want. Just tidy it up a bit. Now from here, I just shape that the way I like. One important point that I need to bring up is, if you are carving with the knife and you're sitting down, this area here, the danger, the triangle of death, becomes a lot closer to you, and you can very easily cut here because we have our femoral arteries here. And if you cut that femoral artery, even if there's an ambulance right next to you, the chances are you're going to die from that because it's a massive bleed. So we need to stay away from that area at all costs. And a great safety tip that I picked up from Paul Kirtley on his courses overseas is that when you are using a knife, it's very, very important when you're sitting down to make sure your elbows are on your knees. If your elbows are on your knees, then you can't possibly cut into that area. So it's a very good safety point, and something particularly with kids working with knives, it's very important when you're sitting down, elbows on knees, and then no accidents can happen. It eliminates that. So that's finished now. So there is my mallet, and I can now use that as a camp tool, and it really can do that in about 5 minutes once you get things moving. And if you're just there for the night, you're not going to have to worry about doing that. Just get any old piece of wood. But if you're going to be there for a couple of days, it's be a good tool to make. And believe me, it comes in handy, particularly when you've got some big stakes to hammer in. You need something with a bit of weight. So preferably, if you get something green, it's got a lot of weight, but you need a good hardwood. If it's a too light a wood, it's just not going to have that weight to sort of hit anything in. But that feels really good, and we'll go and put that to good use. Here's a little camp trick. We've seen this pot hanger that's a very easy pot hanger to make, but if I'm going to be here for a little bit longer than a day or an overnight stay, what I'd like to do is, there's a number of different pot stands, and I think in another episode we've looked at the tripod pot hanger, but we're going to have a look at a crane system pot hanger. Now this is great if you want to hang multiple pots, and how we do it is I've gone into the bush and I've selected 2 pieces of wood, a straight stick with the side branch coming off, like that. So straight stick with the side branch. What you don't want is a V like that, because once we hammer that in, that's just going to split. Very important to select a straight stick if you can find one, and a side branch is actually quite difficult to find in here because all the ones that were good had been burnt out and were dry and dead. We want to use green wood for this because we're around a fire. So I've left a couple of other bars on here just to give me a variety of heights, but we've got a trick we can do to help us adjust the height. So I've got 2 pieces, and I need to make sure when I hammer them into the ground they end up being the same height. So we get our hammer that we made. Start with this one. Generally just a little bit wider than the width of the fire. Depends how long your straight piece is. Come on to the other side of the fire, roughly the same place. Move that around a bit. About there. Bearing in mind I chamfered the end of that. Very important to chamfer the end, and that's going to stop that splitting. Go. how that works, that enables me to take my billy. Well, we can get rid of this for a start. We could keep that if we wanted to. All I need to do, depending on what sort of suspension system you have, I might put the thinner end up that end actually. I can either do that and put that over the fire. However, that's a little bit too high. That's nice to keep something warm, but if I want to get that lower, I'm going to have to come up with another idea. So let's have a look at that, how we get around that one. So in order to adjust our pots so they can hang lower to the fire, I've gone into the bush and looked for some trees. Once again, for a straight tree with some side branches that come off like that. So if you can imagine that tree's growing like that, it's got side branches coming off, and that's what I'm aiming for. And I've cut below one of the side branches and about that length. Now you need to get something straight, it makes it a lot easier. So what we're going to do is simply just cut a notch in here, and that's going to basically, this is going to be our hook on top of our crane system, and we're just going to make a little notch here that's going to help us hold the bale. Now it depends on what sort of pot. There are different sorts of billy cans. The zebra pots have a wider one. I've got a Pathfinder, a wire pot holder, so that's what I'm making this for. But you'd have to adjust the hook that you're making to the sort of pot that you have. So any sort of wire handled pot will work well with what I'm about to show you. So there are a couple of different ways. I've gone ahead and pre-notched one here I'm just literally going to cut in at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm just going to, just like you do a tent peg, and then cut another 45-degree angle into that. Now I used another side branch for this as a bit of extra rigidity, and it made it easier. However, it is on the side. Ideally you want it on the same side as a hook, but it doesn't matter, that will still work. It's just working with what you've got. Now there's another sort that I used as well, and that's using an X cut, and I'll show you that at another time when we make an adjustable pot stand, but there's one that's already pre-done, and that's just using an X cut and then cutting 45 degrees into that. So there's that note that it's on the same side as a hook, because that will sit that way and our hook's going to fit in there. So I'm just going to show you the simplest one to make. Just going to cut that off where that little bend is, because that's just going to get in the way of the pot stand anyway. Folding saw, these Bucko Laplander folding saws are excellent, they really are. Now what I'm going to do, I'll actually keep my saw out, or you can use a finer saw, or you can use a knife. I could cut this in with a knife, but I'm just going to use my saw now just to save a little bit of time. And all I'm going to do, noting where my hook is, so I want the hook to be on the other end here. So I'm going to cut in 45 degrees there. We don't want about a third of the way in, and it's on the same side as the side branch. There we go, straight in there. Then with our knife we're just going to cut down there, being very, very careful that we don't want to cut too far and shear off, and then just we only want to go as far as the stop cut. So I'm going to go very carefully just for the first part. Using that reinforced grip with my left hand, you can see where I'm going in with that. Once you're in there, you can chip that out. Now you could use a knife and not a saw. The wood around here is extremely tough. You can do it, just takes a lot, it takes ages, so that's why I did that with the saw. depending where you are in Australia, some things are easier or they're difficult. And this wood is extremely dense. This was offered something, this died, I can tell what it is actually. Just cutting it is and there you go. That's going to be our pot stand. That's going to pick up our bale and that's going to allow us to hang. Now it won't tip over because the weight of the water will actually keep that in contact. So we're actually relying on gravity, the weight of the water bottle. So make sure you've got a full water bottle when you do this. So the weight of the water bottle will help us do that. Well, here are the pot hangers we made for our crane system. Depending on the type of pot you have and the hanger, you can get variable heights. But for example, with the Pathfinder type pot hanger or any wire hanger, that'll sit down nicely, and it depends on where you want to put the hook. So you can cut it up there to make it shorter. You can't really have a longer stick with multiple hooks on it like we do with other systems because it would actually hit the lid. So that's why that doesn't work for this. You're really limited to one or two. As I said, to get that lowered in the fire, just have a longer stick. And as I said, you've got a variety of things you can do, or I can just simply thread the bale over this, and that's going to be even higher. So if you just want to keep something warm, that's how that works. The other sort that's very commonly used, we use a lot, is the Zebra, and they're really indestructible cooking pots, excellent. Except these have a really thick, or actually the width of the handle is a lot greater, so they won't work on that type of thing. The way that we use these is that we make a different sort of a hook, and we come up with a system where we actually join that. I'll show you that in another episode and how we hang that on the fire. So we need a much bigger hook to accommodate those particular, that kind. Using the same principle as our pot hangers. Once again, that was a tree growing that way, and that's a side branch. Remember, you have to look at it in reverse when you're out in the bush. That now becomes a nice pot lifter to get things off the fire. I can actually, for example, if I had that directly on the fire, like that, if I want to get that off the fire, I've now got a pot hanger that I can now carry that around with. So in the bush, it's just a matter of looking at the trees, looking into the forest, not at it, and just looking at what the resources are there, because there's many different things you can make just from sticks and looking at them the other way around. Trying to find the straight ones are the harder thing, but there's lots of simple tools you can make, and you don't have to take it. There's gadgets with camping and outdoor camping today, which is just ridiculous amount of gadgets there. Gadgets where there shouldn't be gadgets, basically, where you can go into the bush with a knife and a little bit of skill and make your own, and it's a lot more fun as well. Knowledge weighs nothing, so you don't have to take anything. So it's just a few simple things like that. Having this crane system also helps you organise your camp. It keeps everything nice and neat. I like nice and neat, and this keeps it contained and organised as well. I think I'm going to have a cup of tea now. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode on how to make a one-man debris hut using the materials and resources around you. I've had a lot of fun making this shelter. In fact, I have a lot of fun making shelters all the time, even though it can be pretty hard work sometimes. If you like these videos and this channel, please subscribe to the channel. It helps with the visibility and helps rekindle bushcraft in Australia. If you'd like to do one of our courses at Bushcraft Survival Australia, visit our website www.bushcraftsurvivalaustralia.com.au and check out some of the courses that we have on offer. We also have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. And we also have a blog, so if you'd like to see some of the written information and details on some of these things you see in the episode, please visit that on the website. My name's Gordon Dedman, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.